Okay, so tonight I'm reading the third and final part of Ajahn Sona's book, Life is a Near-Death Experience. And he starts with a quote from the Buddha that's recorded in the Dhammapada. Know that the body is a fragile jar, and make a castle of your mind. In every trial, let understanding fight for you to defend what you have won. The Buddha and the King. About a year ago, all of us first learned the name of a new disease, COVID-19. A litany of repurposed and original terms entered our vocabulary and our daily lives: social distancing, herd immunity, contact tracking, lockdown, forced isolation, mask up, elbow bump. Since the pandemic spread across the world, all aspects of our lives have shifted in one way or another. Some people think we're in an unusual time, a time of mass illness and death, but actually there's nothing unusual about this time at all. That's why I keep repeating illness, aging, death, loss over and over and over again. It's a little like memorizing a poem or a recipe. You have to keep the words on the tip of your mind so they will be ready the moment you need them. The Buddha asks us to recollect this handful of 5 conditions every day, maybe 4 or 5 times a day, and really get to know these truths: that humans are of the nature to get ill, to age, to die, and to lose everything which we love along the way. That is constant. That's every day, every single moment of every single day. That is a fact of human existence. And then there's the last of the 5, which is this: my inheritance is my ethical decisions. What I have decided in life, what I have done for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. This is the case for all of us. Yet somehow, every now and then, we get startled by these events. In December 2004, there was a tsunami in Asia that hit Sri Lanka and Thailand and the coast of India. 250,000 people died in about an hour. It hit most people as a shock. We were in winter retreat at that time, and I was asked to go to Vancouver. I remember looking forward to winter retreat, the solitude, etc. And then I got an email about this news. Then the news got worse and worse and worse. At first, they said a few thousand people. They were just counting the bodies they had found. The numbers trickled in, but eventually it became obvious it was 250,000 people at least. So the Thai and Sri Lankan communities got together in Vancouver and invited monks to do some blessings. Some of the survivors were there who had been in the tsunami, had been swept away by it, and had lived. They came up on stage and told their various stories, and then I was invited to give a Dhamma talk on this situation as well. Immediately, what came to mind was that the tsunami was very similar to a story about the Buddha and a king. In this story, the Buddha asks, "O great king, what if you hear that a wall of mountains the size of the Himalayas is rolling towards you from the north, towards the kingdom, and all living beings are crushed by it? No living being escapes." Then the same message comes from the south, then from the east, and then from the west. You're surrounded, O king. No living being escapes. Then the Buddha asks, what will you do? What are the first 4 of the 5 recollections? Illness, aging, death, loss. Those are the mountains as high as the Himalayas. So the king, being a good disciple of the Buddha, answers him, I will do acts of charity and keep the precepts. That's the fifth and final reflection. Whatever I do for good or for ill, that will be my inheritance. Don't worry, everything is out of control. The fact that this kind of thing is going on all the time, the fact is that this kind of thing is going on all the time. What I mean by that is even when a tsunami or a pandemic like this happens, probably in the large statistical view of things, it won't make much difference to the mortality rate on the planet. Even at the longest, everybody on the planet, even the ones who were born today, everybody will be dead within about 100 years, about a century. So you consider the population of the planet, which is approaching 8 billion people. 8 billion people have to die in the next 100 years, and that's a lot of people. About 55 million people die on a regular basis every year from various things, so the statistics won't wobble very much, even though you have this huge tsunami of COVID-19 deaths. We're always in this situation, but every now and then it seems the illusion of it, being some sort of aberration, comes up in people's minds and in the media. Buddhists should always be fully aware of this truth at all the time. All you've got to know is one thing: I was born. If you're born as a human, you have a predisposition to illness, a certainty of aging, and a certainty of death. If you are shocked by that or distressed by that, then you're in denial. And it just so happens that a pandemic is one of the things that makes a lot of people shocked and distressed. Yet there's all kinds of ways to go. Cancer is an epidemic. Heart disease is an epidemic. So are opioid addiction and alcoholism. All of these are huge, widespread ailments, increasing in the population. So COVID-19 is just one of many dreadful possibilities for the human body. And the dreadful possibility is built in at birth. It's a dreadful possibility for the body, but it is not a dreadful possibility for the mind. Undoing this kind of thinking is what you need to do. As the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, know that the body is a fragile jar and make a castle of your mind. Another huge impact of this pandemic is that the economy will be severely shaken. Through this, we're seeing loss, the fourth reflection, in a myriad of forms. Here's another thing about Buddhism. We're big on uncertainty, on the fact that you can't really know these things. There are all kinds of people predicting what will happen to the economy and what the results will be. It's just a wild guess because it's really incalculable. The numbers and the different ramifications are quite beyond linear computation. A worldwide pandemic is happening, and the economic repercussions will affect all of our ways of life. And this is, again, uncertainty. People do become aware of the insecurity of life, like in the midst of wars and in the midst of economic collapses, all of these kinds of things. They're aware of it, but how do they respond to it? They respond with anxiety and terror and nightmares and shock, post-traumatic stress disorder, etc. But this is not how you should respond to it, because it's always the case. Sometimes it's a little bit amplified, sometimes it's close to you. Now it seems you hear nothing else on the news but the number of cases and deaths from this pandemic. But it shouldn't produce any sense of anxiety or excessive concern whatsoever. Why? Because it's always the case that things are out of control. They always are, and you need to be fine in the midst of the chaos. I have this saying, don't worry, everything is out of control. Once you really and truly get that, you will stop worrying and will stop being fearful, because these negative feelings won't change the existential situation we are all in. Illness, aging, death, and loss are always with us. The uncertainty of how close we are to death is unknown to us. It can be an inch away at any time. There has never been a single moment in history when human life has been safe and secure. Rehearsing for death. Humans have this capacity of imagination. They can project into the future. One of the sayings is, we're the only animal that knows we're going to die. We're aware of our mortality, but that's a problem. The advanced development of your prefrontal cortex lets you into a different universe than the other animals, but it also makes you aware of your mortality. The priority in life is to grapple with and understand this fact that you're not getting out alive. Nobody is. Log of wood. You will notice in Thailand that funerals are quite different than you might expect in the West. There you will find a calm acceptance of death. The monks chant a funeral parita, a protection, which is basically a description of reality. Here is a body. It is devoid of consciousness. It's like a log of wood on the ground. To us, it may seem a weird funeral rite, more like a simple report. Here's the body, no consciousness, nothing to see here, it's gone, consciousness moved on. It's very short, just a scientific description of what has happened. Anicca, vata, sankhara, impermanent are all formations. So how should you respond to the fact that you'll one day be just a log of wood? How should you feel about that? What is an intelligent emotional response to this? The Buddha says, well, by not wishing it was some other way, or being shocked by it, or thinking about it. It's to see it clearly and understand what would be the best emotional response to this situation, and it is not suffering. The proper response when reflecting on death is ease and non-fear. No fear, equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, but no fear. There's not a time for fear and a time not for fear. It's always a time not for fear, because life is always dangerous. Good deeds from the past. It's slippery. I had to work on this myself for many, many years to get the mind to acknowledge this and to respond to it in a different way. You're not responding emotionally the same way. This is kind of a repetitive rehearsal that you need to do. And what should you be rehearsing? Positive events, looking back and revisiting your acts of generosity and kindness. Those should be played out again and again, especially as you approach the end of life. The advice for those who are dying is, do not dwell on your failings and negative past. It darkens your consciousness at a time when you really don't need more darkness. The encouragement is to stay away from sadness, remorse, fear, all of those things, especially because you're dying. You want to reshape your consciousness in the brightest way possible. You want to keep coming back to the sense of ease, of loving kindness, of peace, again and again. And if you fail at it, you get caught at times, you lose it, you can't remember it, but you need to repeat it all day and even into your sleep. You're not bringing up fear in the midst of this. Fear is simply not allowed. Breath meditation. One of the hard truths about COVID-19 is that dying can be prolonged and uncomfortable. You're intubated and you can't breathe. You're drowning in the inability of your lungs to process the oxygen. They put a tube down your throat, which is very obnoxious and painful. Breathing itself becomes problematic. It's important that you actually practice this ahead of time. Practice being with the breath because it pulls you into the present. The breath will be with you until the end. These days now, how they deal with people in the advanced stages of this disease is that they intubate them first, put some oxygen in there, but if they're continuing to go downhill, then they put them into a coma and they lose consciousness. So the last thing you'll ever experience is your own breath. And usually, in very many cases, you don't come out of that coma. That's the last thing, and then you die. However, if you have put lots of time into breath meditation, it's a very worthwhile investment. Your consciousness is collected. It's something that is there with you. You're not freaking out, and it can be very beneficial. I talked to a woman who had learned to practice breath meditation for a year or two. She ended up in the emergency room with some sort of constriction of her breath and swelling of the throat. Anaphylactic shock or something similar to that. The medical people were quite amazed at how calm she was. They often deal with anaphylactic panic, a panic response when you can't breathe. It can happen from a bee sting or an allergic reaction, and your throat closes up. She was recounting it to me, saying, I was really just aware of the slowness, this little trickle of breath, and I was staying with it and staying with it. I was able to be lucid and calm because of having practiced so much with the breath. Also, there are different respiratory responses to panic. You'll see doctors looking at respiration, and one of the features of a person in panic is their respirations per minute go up to 30 or 40. One of the features of calmness is that the respirations go down. So a couple of the upsides of practicing breath meditation are calmness and the respirations per minute are reduced. In the Buddhist commentaries, they say that for one who cultivates breath meditation, one of the side effects is you can anticipate your own death, that you have an intuition of the end of breathing, a knowing about when your death is coming, and that's one of the benefits of breath meditation. There are some stories you find in the Visuddhimagga about monks predicting their own death. There's this particular story of a senior monk who had been practicing breath meditation. He said to the junior monks, you know, you've heard of monks dying in meditation, in lotus meditation. Have you ever seen one die while walking? I want you to come to the terrace tomorrow in the afternoon. I will be doing walking meditation. The junior monks show up the next day and he's walking back and forth. And at the end of one of the walking lengths, just before he turns, he dies. He knew he was going to die, and it was kind of his way of saying that dying while sitting is for amateurs. I can do it standing. I can do it walking. Look at this breath and its relationship to death because it is the last thing. No breath, no life. Maranasati, mindfulness of death meditation. Another suggestion as one approaches death is to practice the mindfulness exercise about the nature of death. Maranasati, mindfulness of death, or mindfulness of a corpse, contemplating a corpse, your own corpse, your own body. The Buddha once asked a group of monks, how do you do breath meditation? How do you do Maranasati, mindfulness of death? One says, I think to myself, I could die next week. Another says, I could die tomorrow. A third monk says, I could die at the end of this breath. And the Buddha says, that's good enough. It's not to bring up your fear around this. It's to contemplate this in serenity. When fear comes up, you know you're bringing the wrong emotion to this structure. So if that's the case, then you can let that go. Come back to something like loving kindness or breath meditation. Calm the mind and then return again to the topic of mindfulness of death. The idea of dying next week or tomorrow is not truly in touch with reality, but the end of this breath is close enough. It can happen before the end of this breath. All you have to do is have a heart attack or a stroke and you're done. It's that fast. If you're in a war, just a bullet through the head. That fast. Car accident. It's that fast. Grand truths. We have to reflect on all of these aspects of life countless times throughout our days. And people respond to each of these aspects in a different way. Some people say, I don't mind dying, I just don't want the pain around it. Or as Woody Allen says, it's not that I'm afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens. For some, loss is worse than death, so they will choose death over loss. You see people, the famous and the obscure, jumping out of windows at the Wall Street crash of the Great Depression in 1929. Executives and investors losing their fortunes and just jumping out of windows. Sheer madness. They were clearly more averse to loss than they were to death. Some people just don't want to age. They want to live hard and leave a beautiful corpse. Notice how many of the rock stars have checked out at age 27. Everybody's got their thing. Take your choice. Illness, aging, death, and loss. Which one bothers you the most? Actually, all of these certainties are not intrinsically serious topics. It's the fear that goes with them that's the serious topic. The Buddha is focused on the suffering, the psychological dimension of how we respond to this impossible situation. You can't get around this stuff. You only have one reasonable choice, and that is to stop being afraid. That's the only sane response to this existence, because you can't get out of these situations. They're not negotiable. You can try to negotiate, but you will not get anywhere, except with this ultimate aim, which in Buddhism is Nibbana. Nibbana is the deathless, the end of suffering, the cessation of suffering, right liberation. That's a good thing to have in mind as a possibility. It's a very exalted, difficult to understand concept, but we can get a taste of it. We're not always in fear, and when we're not in fear, when we're feeling balanced and peaceful, you probably like that. You think, I'd like more of that. I'd like to be able to bring this into every situation. This is not a place you want to continue on in, this samsara, this confused state of mind. Samsara is not a place, it's a condition of consciousness. The Buddha says, don't misunderstand this as some place you can find a satisfactory condition. Ultimately, it is all unsatisfactory. We need to acknowledge this: illness, aging, death, and loss. We need to conduct ourselves in the midst of this samsara, this unsatisfactory situation, with great goodwill, generosity, and kindness. This minimizes the suffering content of it. At the same time, we have to retrain the ultimate vision that we need to completely free ourselves and not return. This is the final stage of maturity. Been there, done that. We have addictive tendencies, and the addictive tendencies are based on delusions. We forget and we go back. We can see this in profound addiction, why people keep returning to very unskillful ways. They simply can't remember the downside of their delusion. Basically, all of samsara and the tendency to take birth over and over again is a forgetfulness of the downside, which is how it ends. It's a matter of loss. You lose in the end, and that, from a Buddhist point of view, is summed up in the Dhammapada. Even in heaven, it ends in tears. Now, we're from a Judeo-Christian society where heaven is often described as an eternal condition of bliss or peace or safety. It can be quite disturbing to the Christian and post-Christian mind to come across this premise that heaven is a very long period of time of well-being, but it comes to an end. This is quite upsetting, and people can very strongly reject that idea. It's stuff they don't want to hear. It's actually quite a thing to face, the truth, the Dhamma, about the intrinsic flaw in existence. It's built into all existence. That's why existence is problematic. This is a very elevated idea. Maybe you've never really heard Dhamma or Buddhism. It might be a meditator. Perhaps you've gone to a mindfulness course or a loving kindness course, but you really haven't been exposed to the larger perspective of Buddhism, of the Dhamma. You might even find this rather unsettling. However, I'm a Buddhist monk living in a Buddhist monastery, and if I don't talk about these ultimate things here, where do you talk about them? In the West, Buddhism seems to be a popular alternative to many of the other religions and philosophies. One reason is because it's intrinsically peaceful. There's no violent admonition in it. There's also a lot of psychology to it, so you get to meditate and escape the world for a while. Who can complain about loving kindness or mindfulness or such tranquil things? But quite often, the larger view of reality is not well known. Those who teach these courses of mindfulness and loving kindness know their audience quite well. They know that the general population is really often not there to hear grand truths. They're actually there for some therapy to get them through the next 2 weeks or the next year, or to improve the emotional quality of their life, which it does. And it's a disservice to the Buddha and the Dhamma and the Sangha to not tell people about the larger dimensions of what the Buddha really taught. There's a time and a place for it. It's not something you blurt out on the street corner. The Buddha had discretion. He looked at the person he was talking to, and he recognized that for certain people, it's not the time and place to talk about these big issues. This is the time and place for just some practical advice. He's not wanting to shock people. He's always interested in beneficial speech. It's got to be true, but it's got to be beneficial at the same time. If you say things that a person is not ready to hear, it will not be beneficial. It may be true, but it won't be beneficial. There's a certain amount of skill in this as well. But the larger truths are there, and we're in the midst of this pandemic. So we have to face illness, aging, death, and loss again and again and again. That's the big picture. Your constant companion. There was a man I met many years ago who had been a carpenter when they were building the original structures at Arrow River. This was before it became the Hermitage. He had fallen off one of the roofs of the building he was working on and broke his neck and was now a quadriplegic for life. I had never met him before, but Ajahn Punadamo and I went to visit him in his care facility. I asked him if he meditated, and he said, "Yes, I meditate every day." You see, the reason I fell off that roof was because I was still drunk from the night before. I was an alcoholic heading towards death, and only this fall saved my life. I am so grateful. Sometimes it takes a dramatic shift in life to set us on the spiritual path. It can be a severe accident or a terminal illness, losing your job or your loved ones. It can be the dramatic shifts in society and cultures that we've witnessed during this pandemic, or the impact of climate change that continues to bear down on us, just as those mountains as high as the Himalayas. Yet through it all, we have a choice. We can reflect on these choices with our mind, with our imagination, with our heart. We just have to choose with a relaxed stomach and not with fear or any of those types of emotions. Only then can we allow ourselves to get into the facts of life with serenity. I know these are the real possibilities. I need to practice my emotional response to this now. I need to be calm. You can't freak out. You can't lose your mind. That's the worst thing you can do in this dire situation we call life. These are just the facts. We're always at war with the facts of life. Illness, aging, death, and loss are always a constant companion. The Buddha says, this is your constant companion, death, Maranasati. I'll leave you now with one of the 10 subjects for frequent recollection which the Buddha gave to monks and nuns. It's something all of us can reflect upon. The days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? Handful of Teachings, Part 2, The Buddha and the King. Practice the reflections of illness, aging, death, and loss until they are running in the background of your mind every waking moment and into your dreams. Your duty in the face of these vicissitudes is to always be virtuous and to always do good deeds. Just these will serve you well all the days of your life. Don't worry, everything is out of control. Nothing in life is safe. Nothing is secure. Once you really know this truth, you will stop worrying. You will stop being fearful. The Buddhist response is to be at ease with all of this. Know the body is a fragile jar and make a castle of your mind. Rehearsing for death. Bring to mind your past good deeds, your acts of generosity and kindness. Practice breath meditation and Maranasati, mindfulness of death meditation. The idea of dying next week or tomorrow is not truly in touch with reality, but the end of this breath is close enough. Any time, and especially at the end of life, is no time for fear. Grand truths. The Buddha taught just two things, suffering and its end. Samsara, this confused state of mind, is suffering and not a place you want to continue on in. Nibbana is the deathless, the end of suffering, right liberation. That's the ultimate grand truth and the ultimate goal of Buddhism. Your constant companion. Sometimes it takes a dramatic shift in our lives to set us on the spiritual path. Through it all, we have a choice. The Buddha asks us to choose calm and ease in the face of in the face of fear and delusion. The days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time?